What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Overpowered Podcast, the podcast where we talk to the top digital creators of the internet about the amazing things that they create. I'm Ty King, and with me today is the founder of Get Your Grind Up and the Declassified College Podcast. It is Justin Nguyen. Justin, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad that you said it correctly. There's my last name, and Get Your Grind Up. Everyone always tries to change it to Get Your Grind Up, and it's Cho. It's Cho. So I love that.
Get Joe. You got to put the emphasis on it. Get Joe Grind Up.
Exactly.
Probably just as many times as people get your last name wrong, right?
Oh yeah, trust me. I've heard so many different pronunciations of my last name. It's insane.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I imagine so. So tell me about Get You Grind Up, and I guess Declassifying College Podcast is part of that, right?
Yeah. So with Get Your Grind Up, what we're looking to do is the overarching mission is to make college easier. And the way that we're looking to do that is creating a media company. And the reason that we're looking to create a media company is if you're looking at how the traditional Gen Z student is getting a lot of their information, it's typically now through YouTube, TikTok, etc. So we've had to find a way to make career education cool and make it in some sort of way so that the younger generation is looking forward to it so that they're not getting into massive amounts of debts before they're in college. That's sort of our whole mission, is making sure that college is easier for all of these young individuals out there.
Absolutely. And from what I've been doing a little bit of research on you, and so it seems like you've got a podcast for Get Your Grind Up. You've got the podcast for Declassify College, and it's sort of and tell me if I'm wrong. So Get Your Grind Up is more aimed towards the entrepreneurs of today.
Correct.
And the younger generations, the ones who are coming up. And Declassified is sort of aimed at people that are in college or about to enter the workforce or trying to get their career started.
100%. Yeah. I mean, you've done your research. That's awesome. From the Get Your Grinder perspective, that was our first show, where right now we're not really producing it because we're not sure where it's going to kind of go. But we learned a lot from that show. And the whole purpose of that was to really shed light on the world of these really young and successful individuals who typically they were entrepreneurs, right? We always see these quote unquote overnight successes, whether it be through social media, influencers, whatever it may be. And we wanted to showcase the real story of these individuals. So we've had people on who have millions of followers, teenagers that have raised millions of dollars in terms of VC, and just wanting to understand what's the actual process behind that, especially at a young age. So that was the purpose of that show. And the reason that we're transitioning more towards Declassified College is because we realized that this niche, no one is really talking about it from a Gen Z perspective. Most people that are talking in the career space are much older than the average college student or high school student. And they're sort of speaking down to a lot of students. They're like, you need to network or you need to get on LinkedIn, but they're not actually providing a lot of information. Right. So what we do is we answer the questions that we knew that we had back when we were in college. I graduated 2 years ago, so that we can bridge that gap much easier than, let's say, a 40 or 50-year-old talking about careers.
Sure. And those 40 or 50 or even older people that are trying to give advice, like business just is not run the same way as it was when they were getting into their careers. And so how can you advise somebody else on how to use, say social media techniques to, promote your resume or your skills or something when you don't use it yourself, or you didn't have that when you were trying to grow up. It was just knocking on doors and trying to sell yourself, right?
Exactly. And like my whole thing with like career educators is it's always funny, right? Because especially if you look at most career service departments, a lot of those people have been there for 10, 15, 20 years, and they haven't really had to find another job. They might have gotten promotions and such, but that's very different than actually having to go out and find a job. So especially over the past 10 to 20 years, the job search has changed completely. 20 years ago, LinkedIn wasn't a thing. No one was really using the internet the way that people are using it today. Yes. And that is a plus, but also a minus depending on how you use it. So being able to speak, I like to call it the Gen Z language, and taking that information, because there is some valuable stuff that the older folks have, and translating that to the younger generation in a way that they're consuming it. Case in point with our podcast, everything is 5 to 15 minutes long, whereas most career podcasts out there right now, most of them are 30 to 60 minutes plus.
Sure. It's one of the funny things, like when I was an up and coming, digital marketer myself, approaching some of these companies and sort of like trying to help them out, and because they weren't digitally inclined, but they'll be like, no, thanks. We've got collectively 60 to 80 years of marketing experience. And it's like you just said, LinkedIn wasn't around 20 years ago. So how can you have 80 years of experience in something that didn't even exist? And so it sounds good, but it's not reality. And so, yeah, so your podcast sort of cut down the opposite of what mine do. Yours cuts down to the meat and potatoes of what the conversation is. And so it's just, it's the bites of the most nutrition of the conversation that you could possibly have. And
Yeah,
so,
well, we knew that the younger generation, our attention
mhm,
spans are just so small,
sure.
right? Where we can barely watch a 30-second TikTok. We're like, why is it going for so long? Let alone a 30-minute or 60-minute podcast. So we
Right.
needed to find a way to create a show that would keep students' attention spans, but also be long enough to be able to give them, like you said, the meats and potatoes of
Mhm.
the actual concepts that we're trying to get through. So that's why we came up with the show. Again, 5 to 15 minutes for the most part. But I think the unique thing that we've added to it is in that 5 to 15 minutes, you're not just listening to my boring voice the whole time. We have 3 to 5 different perspectives in most of our episodes. So that allows what we like to call like audio cuts. And the
Mhm.
reason that we have audio cuts is when we looked at the big time YouTubers of the Mr. Beast, the David Dobrik's, the Logan and Jake Pauls, etc., they
Mhm.
always use visual cuts. So we're like, how can we use visual cuts? We don't have visual, but we have audio. So we use different individuals' voices as our audio cuts to retain people's attentions.
Yeah, that makes complete and perfect sense. What was the deciding factor of not doing video? And so you're strictly audio, right?
Yeah, so we're strictly audio. And the reason for that is just because of the nature of our show right now, it would be extremely difficult to do video, right? Yes, our show is only 5 to 15 minutes, but
Mhm.
because we're incorporating different episodes or different perspectives in each episode, that would get really tricky from a video standpoint. Like we don't actually go out and interview most of these episodes. We go out, send them the questions that we want answered, take their audio back, and then splice it into the great episodes that we have on our show. So it's more of an edited show rather than a live in-person sort of interview.
That's awesome. And so you're ranked among what is it, the top 100 podcasts, right?
Yeah, we go in and out of the top 100 podcasts for Apple. Yeah,
So going now, we're gonna make it stay there. And so
100%.
I noticed it's broken up into seasons.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
you're on season 7 now, or is that closed off?
Yes, season 7 right now.
Okay.
We just started season seven last week.
Okay. So what was the decision behind that? Is it just so you release a certain amount of episodes and then you take a break for a while, then you come back, or is it sequential, or is it on the same topic, or how does that broken up?
Yeah, so the initial reasoning for the seasons was like, oh, this would be really cool if we broke things up for like freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, and senior
Oh,
year.
okay.
But then we got to season 4 and we're like, well, how do we keep going? Right? We can't do like super senior,
Yeah.
super senior. Like that doesn't work. So the reason that we've kept it going is now we're starting to section off majority of our seasons in terms of each season is focused towards a specific topic. So previously season 6, that was all focused towards MBAs and whether or not MBAs were worth it. So pretty much every episode there was about that. And then this season is sort of college tips for early on in your career. And I think what we're going to do moving forward is finding ways to section off these seasons because A, it makes life a little bit easier in terms of reaching out to people, but also B, the seasons, we have 1 week in between each season, and that allows for the bulk majority of the editing to be done there so that we can schedule everything out. At least that in theory is the plan. Um, in terms
Sure.
of execution, as we all know, it doesn't always happen like that.
Right. Exactly. So how did Justin Nguyen get started with this? With Get Your Grind Up? Where did you come from? Were you just jumping out of college and was like, I gotta get this done? Or did it come out of just a moment of inspiration as in your adult years? What happened?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a really unique journey. I mean, my parents' journey is even crazier than mine, but both of
Mhm.
them are Vietnamese refugees and they came over here when they were extremely young. But basically, I grew up in the suburbs, had a pretty good life because of my parents that they gave me. And ended up being very lazy. I got good grades just because I was just naturally smart, but I never really had to put in a lot of work, thankfully. I'm grateful for that. But then I got to college, and my grandpa it was his birthday, I believe, and my aunt gave a presentation during his birthday. And in that presentation, she talks about how he came from Vietnam, left everything back there, came here with $0, and graduated college in 2 years with an engineering degree without knowing English. And I'm like, well, if this guy can graduate college in 2 years without knowing English, why the heck am I complaining about studying for this math exam or whatever it is? I have
Mm-hmm.
no excuse to be lazy. And that started, in terms of that, switched the momentum of when I started to actually put in the work for things. And one thing led to another, where I was applying for internships and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't getting it. Again, I had the good grades, I was joining the clubs, but my resume would always get rejected. And fast forward to when I graduated college, I had 5 internships, 3 at Fortune 500 companies. And I learned a whole bunch of these cheat codes along that way, that especially for like the immigrant and the first generation student, their parents don't just know that. And it's not necessarily their fault, and it's not the student's fault either. They just don't know where to find that. And I want to become that voice. I want to build that company that is able to bridge that gap, especially for the students that just don't know any better, and they don't know where to look for that info.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, and like you said, a lot of people, they're just jumping into college, or like, what college is as a kid, you're growing up or even going through high school, and like there's, you can be prepped for a little bit, but once you're just thrown in there, it's a whole different world, and like suddenly you're surrounded in it. And I love that you call it cheat codes. It's like you're giving those little bit of tidbits that is like, hey, this will change your life in college and beyond, because this is what this is. You're preparing for the world to get out there and build your own career. You're not going to be in college forever. And so
Exactly.
that's pretty amazing. One of the cheat codes that you were throwing out recently, I think I found this on Instagram, where you were talking about resumes, sending your resume into a top, Fortune 500 company. How do you get seen there? How do you even get interviewed for that job? And before, what a lot of people don't know is that it actually goes through some algorithms, and bots are looking over your resume before it even reaches a set of human eyes. And so you were talking about loading it down with keywords that really emphasize what your specialty is, or some things that they might be looking for that you could offer. So I don't know. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think you've given us, there was a division there. It was like the 2 ways you can get in there is either you can do great on this resume and make it past the bots to human eyes, or have somebody on the inside to refer you. And
100%.
if you don't have anybody on the inside, it's kind of hard to make that connection in the first place. So
yeah, I mean, so just briefly talking about the ATS system. So that is that robot that you're kind of talking about. And I think it's like 99% of all Fortune 500 companies have an ATS system. And the reason for that is just the mass amounts of resumes that these companies are getting. There's no way that human eyes can look at every single one of them. But the way that it works is it's basically a computer or software, whatever it may be, that looks through your resume to make sure that you have specific keywords that the employer is looking for. So if you're going for a marketing role, that could be making sure that you have a 3 years experience in digital marketing, that you have Adobe Photoshop under your belt, Microsoft Excel, yada, yada, yada. If you don't have those keywords on your resume, or if it's not formatted correctly, the computer is going to misread it and think that, oh, this person's not qualified. We're just going to dump it out. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think that, oh, I sent in my resume to Google, they saw it, they just didn't like it. And that's just not the case most of the time. Most of the time, your resume is just not even seen by the recruiter. So the best way to figure out what those keywords are, because especially if you're coming from a non-technical background and even a business background, you might be, what the heck is a keyword? If you go to jobscan.co, what you can do is go on LinkedIn, go on Indeed, whatever it may be, and look up the job description that you actually want to work for. It doesn't have to be at the exact company that you want to work for, but just the job description. Find 2 or 3 of those and upload it to jobscan.co. What JobScan will do is it'll scan the resume as if it was an ATS system, and then it'll tell you what are the big keywords that that job description says the most. So once you know what keywords are the most relevant for that job description, you have to find ways to incorporate that into your past experiences, your summary, whatever it may be on your resume. You have to find a way to put those throughout.
Wow. Well, that's a really amazingly helpful tool to have, right?
Yeah,
It's kind
no
of
one
like,
knows about it though.
yeah. Well, they do now. You just told everybody. And so it's like making practice runs for your SAT test or something. It's like, I want to do really good here. So I want to work for the Fortune 500 companies.
Exactly.
So speaking of social media, which is ways I found you like to have a little bit of fun too. So
Of
I noticed
course.
that on your show notes at the very bottom, it says, if you want a little, if you want a little bitty cringiness, go here. I went, and then there's all your TikTok videos.
Oh God.
So let's just talk a little bit about, like modern, I guess, social media, the tactics that we use. And this isn't really a tactic. It was just having a little bit of fun, right? You're just throwing that out there to reach, putting as many brands in the fire as you possibly can, so that eventually somebody will find you some way, whether it's through Instagram or TikTok or Apple Podcasts, or being referred to, or even going to another show like you're doing now. And so having as many outlets to your content as possible, how important is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the number one thing. And that's why we were just kind of experimenting with TikTok, right? Where we're sort of running a few tests all over the place in terms of what we're doing right now. We have a campus ambassadorship program. We're messing around with TikTok, trying to build out the SEO of our website. Those are kind of the three main things that we're doing right now in terms of like marketing efforts. But TikTok was just really random. I was sick and tired of just scrolling on TikTok and not really putting anything out on there. And what ended up happening is we've had the channel for a little bit of time, but I think we only had like 100 followers, if that, when we were starting to take it serious. And I think it was in 8 or 9 days, maybe even in a week, we grew to 10,000 plus followers.
Wow.
And that was like, we had like 1 million plus views during that time. It was insane, but that just came from us putting out and just testing things that we'd seen through TikTok. So we knew that Gen Zs are demo, they're on TikTok. So why not just try it? Because we never know who might come over and listen to the show and then become a listener.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. Using new platforms to reach, like I said, the Gen Zs. You're not going to, those same people that were trying to give advice earlier, those 40, 50, 60-year-olds, they're not going to be on TikTok more than likely. So
Exactly.
And so that's pretty amazing. So something I wanted to ask you about. So when you're training somebody to go through college and then to start their career, right? Is there something to be learned in the Declassifying College podcast for people who have dropped out of college? Maybe they got discouraged, or they decided to follow a different kind of career path that was, the education wasn't being offered at their college, and so they dropped out and tried to find their own way. How do you offer information for those people, or even like the ones that have done like the Phoenix University or like online learning?
Of course. I think the beauty of our show is a lot of the concepts can be applied to other generations, other people of different circumstances, whether you've dropped out or not. And the only reason that we're calling it Declassified College is because we just want the branding to kind of be there. Now, in terms of like cheat codes for someone that might drop out or who has dropped out, I think just learning how to build out like your LinkedIn profile, that doesn't matter of if you've never been to college or if you've dropped out of college. Having a solid LinkedIn profile can help you out in your career as long as you have some way, shape, or form of showcasing your expertise. Now, of course, when someone goes to your LinkedIn profile and they see that you've dropped out or you didn't complete college, you're going to have to overcome that barrier in some way, shape, or form. I can't help you do that. The only person that can do that is yourself, of you putting yourself out there and getting that experience. But again, that comes, how do you get that experience without experience? And I think there's multiple different ways. You've got LinkedIn to connect with people. You've got resources like Career Karma, which we've given out several shout outs on our show, which is basically a boot camp matching system. And most people don't realize that there are a bunch of boot camps out there that are free to start. And what that means is they have what is called an income share agreement. And most people don't know what those are, but basically it's free for when you're in the school. And then when you graduate, the only time that you pay is if you graduate and you're making over X amount of dollars. So for instance, for like Lambda school, the way that it works is it's 6-month program, I believe it is, and you don't pay for anything during those 6 months. Once you graduate, if you get a job in computer science, making over $50,000, then you have to pay back, I think, 17% or something like that over the next 2 or 3 years. So it's less upfront cost. And for people who might be in sort of an income crunch, those could be really useful for people like that.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So you're investing in your future, and they're helping you advance your career and let you know all the different techniques that they need to know to further their career and to get hired. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, like the interesting thing about those models is then it actually puts the school, like the school has skin in the game, right? If you're going to a regular university, they don't have skin in the game. Once you sign that tuition check, they get it, it's theirs. Whereas with a school like Lambda School, their whole goal is to get you a job, because if they can't get you a job, then they don't get paid. And I think, could that be the future? It definitely could. And we're looking to see what that can kind of be. The only problem with that comes like with non-tech fields. Is the income sustainable with a psychology major, with an English major, etc.? That's where the trickiness kind of comes, because tech, majority of the time, you get paid more when you're going into tech.
Absolutely. And, for careers that depend on getting more clients, rather than just working for another company, if you're building tech for somebody, that's also obviously viable. If you're starting your own practice as a psychologist, like you said, how viable is that going to be? Well, it depends on the area, location, the need, what's going on in the economy. And there's a lot going on there. So yeah, so there's definitely room to improve, but it's good to know that there are programs like that out there that are going to be helping in the future. So how did your podcast? And so nobody taught you, right? Nobody was like, we're going to really invest and get your grind up and help this guy out. So where did you sort of learn your skills of how to make the connections, to get the meat of the content and to put it out there, and the different formats that you do that in, like putting a podcast together? Is there somebody that you looked at for inspiration, or sort of like, did you come up with your own? You're like, I'm just gonna figure out how to reverse engineer this thing that other people have done, and I'm gonna do it myself. How did that go?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it came to learning like the marketing and everything like that behind the show, a lot of that came from just self learning of like YouTube and things like that. Like I pay attention to a bunch of guys on YouTube, like Brian Dean, Colin and Samir. And what I try to do is like, I try to figure out what are the people that I pay attention to the most, what are they doing? And then how can I incorporate that into my own sort of content? When it comes to like, how did we come up with this podcast concept as a whole? I think that came from trial and error. Our first podcast, we thought that the content was good, but just the formatting of it just didn't suit our audience. So when we looked at retention rates, it was like 30 or 40% of the people that were listening would finish the episode. Now, when we look at our show, we're getting anywhere between 80 to 90+% consumption rates on our show. So of course it is a shorter show, but what we've heard from students is they're binging like it's Netflix. So even though our shows are shorter, they're binging multiple episodes, and in turn they're listening longer, which I think is a super unique concept in and of itself.
Absolutely. So is that how the word of your podcast was being shared? Was that some students found it on a certain campus, and then they started to say, hey, you got to listen to this guy, this will really help you out? Or how did you start getting more listenership?
Yeah, I mean, the beginning was tough, because my LinkedIn, like I have a large following on LinkedIn. I get about 250,000 views per month on my content, which on surface value, that's like, oh my God, that's amazing. But in terms of conversion rates, when I was doing that, I was getting 2, 3, 5 clicks per post. So a lot of that wouldn't transfer. So I was trying to figure out what is the best way to get these people to convert into listeners. And at the very beginning, what I was just doing is I would literally sit down on LinkedIn. I think I did it for like a whole month, and I would just message 30 students every single day. I was just like, hey, I had this podcast, would love for you to check it out and get your feedback. And we didn't really market our first couple seasons of the show. Those were more just tests to see if the concept was something that was viable. And what we found out was it was really good. So we needed to put more effort towards the marketing side. So now that we I think that's the first thing that a lot of podcast people don't understand is making sure that your content is good and that it's something that your audience wants to hear, because you can drive as much traffic as you want to something, but if it's bad, people might listen to an episode, but they're not going to come back and listen to it again and again and again. And it's not like it's a product where you have to pay 25, 50, $100 for it. It's free. So you're not getting any pushback or any kickback unless you're getting them to listen episode after episode.
Right. Yeah. And I meant to mention that at the beginning. So you've had, let's see, 7,500 followers on LinkedIn, and you receive over 250,000 views each month. That's a lot. Those are high numbers.
When you look at it from a number standpoint, right, it's like crazy. But again, numbers are great, but if the conversion rates aren't great, then it doesn't really matter. And that's what I started to figure out, because I was like, oh my God, I'm amazing. I'm getting so many views. But what ended up happening is, because of the way that LinkedIn's algorithm works, when you put links in your post, they dumb it down on the algorithm, so you get less views. So it's sort of like a dance that you have to make with each post, of figuring out, can you post, or can you link this here, can you not link this here, how is this going to work? And when I realized that, I was like, okay, I need to start diversifying my audience to different platforms, and that's why we started to mess around with TikTok as well.
Well, yeah. So that did. I didn't realize that the algorithm like pushes you down if you have a link to an outside site. I know that LinkedIn wasn't very friendly with links in the first place, because they always like, if you post a URL, it'll shorten it down to something else, and it's like they only want you to use LinkedIn at the moment. So
Yep,
that's pretty amazing. So where do you see, what do you want to take? What's the ultimate picture here for Get Your Grind Up? I know you want to help as many people as possible. How big are we going to get here?
Well, I think for what we want to do, my vision for this is to become, from the media side, a Barstool Sports or a BuzzFeed, but of career education. I think the way that media and content is kind of changing is we've sort of seen a resurgence in the personal finance world, right? I would say 10 years ago, no one cared about personal finances. It was kind of this hush hush thing that people were like, oh my God, like I don't know what to do with my finances, but no one really talked about it.
Don't
right?
talk about that, what you make.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, don't talk about how much you're making, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But now, because of the internet and places like YouTube, you have individuals like Graham Stephan that have built up huge followings around the personal finance space. And they've sort of turned down the stigma of, you can't talk about this. And I kind of want to do the same about career education, because for me, I think it's absolutely wild that no one talks about career education until you reach your senior year, if that, right? Most of the time, it's like you just pick a major, and that major comes from whether it's your family pressuring you, or just what your career advisor told you, or maybe you took a test and it said that this is your major that you want to take. Most people don't have any real experience when it comes to picking their major. And I think that's why most students end up switching their major while they're in college, because they have no real experience to back up that decision. And I just want that conversation to start earlier. I'm starting with college first, because that avenue is the least resistant in terms of innovation compared to high school. But I ultimately want to get into high school, because one of the common feedbacks from our show is that I wish that I listened to this earlier, whether it be my freshman or sophomore year of college or my junior and senior year of high school.
Absolutely. Yeah. Be way more prepared for what's going to be going on in college if you're in high school. And you're already getting this information like, oh, this is what I'm really getting into. It's not just going to classes like I do in high school, is it? So
yeah, it's insane, because like I remember when I was in my junior and senior year of high school, it's like college is the best 4 years of your life.
Yeah.
You just have to accept that you're going to be in debt, and you have to pick a major. Like those were literally like the only 3 things that I knew about college. And then of course going out and partying, right? That's like core 4 things that you hear about college in high school. And it's like, okay, then you get to college and you're like, so what do you want to do with your life? And like, I don't know. I didn't know I had to figure that out, because who knows what they want to do with their life, especially when you're in high school and all you've ever known is going to a classroom and sitting down from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. or whatever it may be. Like that's such a switch to now like, oh my God, I need to figure out what job I want to do. And I'm coming from suburban America. So I cannot even imagine what it's like coming from low income, where it's like that conversation probably isn't even had until who knows how late. And that's the people that really need the help.
Absolutely. So do you have a system that helps people narrow down what they want to major or minor in?
So this is the right now the main piece of content that we put out is our podcast, and the reason that we're focusing on the podcast is just a bandwidth purposes, but also b we have a section of our show where we have it's called like a career in, and the reason for that is even when we're talking to college students and you have a
Mhm.
marketing background, I'll go and ask a college student like, hey, like what do you want to do like once you graduate, and like it's totally okay if you don't know, and they're like, yeah, I want to get into marketing. I know I want to get into marketing. I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do in marketing? They're like, I want to do marketing.
Yeah,
And
marketing.
it's like, but what does that mean? You were so
Right.
confident in saying that you want to do
Hmm.
marketing, but then you dive into it and it's like, you actually don't know what you want to do. You know what I
Right.
mean? It just seems cool to go into marketing. And what we wanted to do with this show is we talk to specific like job titles from around the different sectors, whether it be like the video game designer or the
Hmm.
digital marketer or the software engineer. And even software engineer, we did a comparison of like big tech versus startup because those are two different lifestyles as well. And these are all the things that people don't don't even know about. But what I envision the podcast as being is that first source of education, so that it starts to stimulate your brain in terms of, okay, what questions do I start to ask, and can I go to Google to ask this question, and then that's when you start getting into the rabbit holes of like different career paths, all these different sort of things. So I want to be that catalyst that gets you interested in careers, because it's not just seen as something like, oh my God, I have to go pick a 9 to 5 now. It's more of like, oh my God, like if I get started early, maybe I can find a job that I actually like by the time I graduate.
Right. And making that narrowing down of what it means to whatever you want to be. Like you said, if you want to be a digital marketer, like there's tons of that. Like I have just as hard a time describing people what I do now that I'm already in that position, you know what I mean, as I would if I was just like, I want to be this. Because they're like, do you do this? You are a digital marketer. You must have, this. You'd be able to back program. You're just a hacking whiz on the computer, aren't you? And I'm like, well, I don't actually do the coding for this, or this is somebody else's. This is something, and like they're just completely dumbfounded because they don't understand it. Say that for like video game design, like you said, if you're wanting to be a video game designer, narrow it down. Well, how much of that work is actually being taken up by other positions that you thought included video game designer, like the writers, or the people that actually do the graphics part, or like the scene narration, you know what I mean? They still have drawing boards just like they do in movies, putting the clips up. And so, yeah, making that journey to the career that you want, and narrowing it down is almost a journey of self-discovery too. It's like, this is what I'm really great at. This is what I want to do. And these are my goals, and setting that forth. And the fact that you're helping people come to that, and it's amazing because it not only covers their career, but it also helps them in life, period, because they'll be more settled, more self-confident. They don't feel like the tides are going to turn on them at any moment. I mean, this has been a crazy year. We were talking a little bit about that before we started. Political climate, actual climate, you know what I mean? The COVID madness that hit. I mean, you have to be prepared for these things. How can you adjust? And that's what people keep saying is pivot, 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 pivot. Finding those things that you are essentially good at your core, and sticking with those things, but using them in more unique ways is incredibly important. But if you're just on shaky ground to begin with, then you're just going to crumble. And so it's amazing that your podcast exists out there to help people to focus in and to come into whatever they want it to be.
Thank you, man. I mean, I think just kind of talking about that point right there, like the foundation,
Mm-hmm.
that is just the most important thing. And I think most people don't have that foundation, especially when it comes to their career, right? Coming out of college, most students don't know what they want to do. They dread coming back home for family get-togethers because they know the number one question that they're going
Right.
to get is, "Oh, so Justin, what are you going to do when you graduate?" Or like, "What are you doing next year?" And like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm guilty of that too. I'll ask my little cousins doing that during that. But like, I think fully that one of the biggest problems when it comes to just younger individuals not knowing what they want to do is that they don't know how to ask a good question. And when you learn to ask a good question, then that's when you start getting the actual insights that you need to get for your personal perspective. For instance, if you go to a keynote speaker, right, and he goes and talks, he gives his spiel, he's probably had that spiel. He's done it dozens, if not hundreds of times before. You can probably find it on YouTube. The only way for you to get something tangible from that talk is if you ask a really good question that's personable to you. And people don't realize that. They're like, oh, I went to go see Gary Vee talk. And it's like, dude, you can see that talk a million times on YouTube if you want to, right? He's done that. If you want to get value from a Gary Vee talk, you need to sit down for an hour during that talk and come up with a really good question that can be applicable to your life. And if students did that, I see it all the time in terms of during like when schools bring in speakers and all that, the speaker would be like, okay, does anyone have any questions? No hands raised. And that's the opportunity that people need to start taking advantage of.
Absolutely. And I would even say in job interviews, because that's one of the things the employers say. So do you have any questions? And if you're just say no, that's a huge missed opportunity, because like you said, it could have been very, very specific to helping you out. They offered a door. They opened a door. Here, you want to walk through? And then you're like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to sit right here. And the door closes and you miss that opportunity. So Justin, it's been awesome talking to you, and I'm glad that you came on and introduced a lot more people to your podcast. And hopefully, I look forward to seeing how that continues and how you continue to grow and the goals that you've set for yourself and breaking into high schools and things. Man, I can't wait to watch it. Can't wait to see it happen. We'll put all your links and information in the show notes of the show. But if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, how would they do so?
Yeah, you can shoot me a LinkedIn connection request. Make sure it's personalized. It's just, you can find me at linkedin.com/IN/Justin GCGU. So it's pretty simple. Just Justin GCGU after all of the forward slashes and everything. And then just send me a personalized invite because I get so many. So just do that. Let me know the show sent you.
Awesome. And you have a website for Get Your Grind Up?
Yeah, and the website as well, if you want to check it out, it's getchogrindup.com. So GETCHOGRINDUP.com. Awesome. So thanks for coming on, and we will get this up soon. If you want to say bye, you can say bye. Of course. No, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
It's a pleasure for us. All right. We'll see you guys later.